In Luke chapter 6, Jesus gave a sermon. That literally changed the world. I know you hear that expression a lot, but he really did. Luke 6 is often referred to, starting in about verse 20, as the Sermon on the Plain. And it contains very similar content to Matthew 5 through 8, which has been called the Sermon on the Mount. And what really was going on, or what most likely the case was, is that Jesus shared a similar message often. He often hammered out certain themes throughout his teaching. And so we capture those in these two instances in which we find Jesus teaching a large group of people. Now, this wasn't uncommon in Jesus' day. A lot of teachers, rabbis, different ones, they would have common themes. What is unique about Jesus is his content. What Jesus said was revolutionary. And when I say revolutionary, I don't believe Jesus' message was meant to overthrow Roman rule or the religious hierarchy of his day, but rather I believe his message was meant to overthrow those deep-seated things that we believe about God that just aren't true. I believe Jesus set out to fix man's understanding of God. So today I want to look at three things out of this message: our foundation, our faith, and our fruit, and that he points out. And next week we'll look at a few more things in this message. But first, let's consider that Jesus taught that our foundation had to be in Jesus' teaching. So why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say? I will show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listens to my teaching, and then follows it. It's like a person building a house who digs deep and lays the foundation on a solid rock. So let's be clear. The house Jesus is talking about building on a solid rock or on sand, as he concludes his message, is you. It's not your life, it's not your house, it's not your possessions, it's not your relationships, your family, it's you. And Jesus presents this idea that you could live your life in such a way that you could destroy it, or you could live your life in such a way that it was pretty much invincible, that the storms, or it's at least storm-proof. And the difference is whether or not an individual ignores or adheres to the teachings of Jesus. So we need to understand that. Jesus made it clear. There's one differentiation between a life that stands and a life that falls down. And that variation is this: do you adhere to Jesus' teaching, or do you ignore Jesus' teaching? So our foundation, Jesus makes clear, has to be in the things that he taught us, not just learned, but lived. In Ephesians 3:17, Paul wrote, "Then Christ will make his home in your hearts as you trust in him. Your roots will grow down into God's love and keep you strong." I think Paul reinforces that idea in Ephesians 3, that Jesus Christ and his teachings and God's love, by extension, are our foundation. The second thing we see is that our faith needs to be in God's future. In verses 20 and 21, Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "God blesses you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. God blesses you who are hungry now, for you will be satisfied. God blesses you who weep now, for in due time you will laugh." And in verse 24 he says, "What sorrow awaits you who are rich, for you have your only happiness now. What sorrow awaits you who are fat and prosperous, for a time of awful hunger awaits you. What sorrow awaits you who laugh now, for your laughing will turn to mourning and sorrow." Here Jesus presents the blessings and the sorrows, the beatitudes, and if you'll permit, the don't be attitudes. And the difference in them, because the actions are the same. There's laughter, there's hunger and being satisfied. The actions are very similar, but the difference between whether they are a blessing or a curse is their timing. When are they experienced? Jesus simply points out that if you're poor, hungry, sorrowful now, that you're going to be blessed later. But if you're rich, popular, and full now, then the sorrows will be coming later. Now, why would Jesus even present such an idea? And I think the issue is an issue of kingdom. He said it in Matthew 6:33 to seek God's kingdom first. So the issue at stake is, whose kingdom are we advancing? Are we advancing God's kingdom? Because God's kingdom is here to seek and save the lost, to express God's will in a broken and a corrupt world. Or are we here advancing our own kingdom, our own agenda? Now, Jesus made it clear that God's kingdom was primary and the only one that would last. So, we must have our faith in the future. We must look beyond this life. If we only want to be happy here, Jesus says there's going to be sorrow later. But if we look to eternity, see all of God's family joined together, see all of God's family in worship to God, and long for the day that we're part of that moment, well, that changes the way we live our lives. That enables us to have sorrow now and hope of the future, to sacrifice now and to secure that future. The last thing that Jesus talked about is the fruits. And so we'll look at verse 45. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. An evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. Have you ever wondered what's wrong? Why aren't we more faith-focused, faith-grounded, spiritually concerned? I mean, the truth is that very few people have very many truly spiritual conversations. And I'm not talking about conversations about Bible or knowledge or those things. I'm talking about the conversations that grow from a relationship with God that's deeply grounded in the things God has taught us about ourselves and about Him in His Word. How come we never get to that? In fact, it's just the opposite. We not only don't talk about those spiritual things, we spend so much time, we waste a lot of time talking about things that really have no eternal significance. We spend a lot of time talking about sports, which there's nothing wrong with those things. It's just that if we never get around to the spiritual aspect, like what is God doing in your life? How is God moving at your workplace and your family? If we never get to those kinds of conversations, well, then we're shallow. When we're shallow, then our faith becomes more complaining, criticizing. Our view of spiritual things, of church, becomes more of a department store mentality. We want our church to provide for all of our needs, and we look at our ministries and our churches as something that we consume from. I guess my point is simply this. We talk about what fills our minds. It would seem from Jesus' message that He had a different idea of the things that should fill our minds. The things that should fill our minds, our schedules, and our activities, Jesus felt should be kingdom-oriented. They should be focused upon the Father and not upon building our own kingdom. When we are focused on our own kingdom, it produces a dissatisfaction in us. And that's why we complain more than we should, or we criticize. So let me give you a passage of Paul's and present one closing idea. In Colossians 3, Paul wrote, "Make allowance for each other's faults. Forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others." I wish there were time to go into the full length of Colossians 3, because it's an incredible passage and there's so much more there to discuss. But I raise the verse because I simply want to bring a question before us all. And that question is this: what if God's people could not be offended? What if we had no reason to complain or criticize? How might that change our ministries, our work in the world, and the world's perception of believers? I think it would change everything. I believe this is why one of the many reasons Jesus' sermon focuses upon the kingdom of God and tries to move our minds from continually being focused upon ourselves to constantly being focused upon the Father and in His throne room and in what's happening in eternity. What if we were the kind of people that we were so focused on our Father that we could love and not be hurt, not be offended, and never become critical? I believe it would change everything. There are a lot more things I'd like to talk about in this message, so we're going to talk about Luke 6 again next week. But for this week, I want to ask you that closing question, simply this. What if you lived this week? What if I lived this week completely unoffendable? No one could offend me. And in place of the offense or the criticism I would normally give, comes only love for that other person. Think about it and have a great week.